Hello and welcome to Renew Wales in Conversation. Our topic today is transport, so a nice wide-ranging one. Can the three of you please around the table just briefly introduce yourselves?
Hi up, my name's Andrew Burns. I'm founder of Cycle Training Wales. It's a bit like what it says on the tin. We're a social enterprise that aims to increase the amount of cycling people do through sort of educational activities and sort of access to bicycles.
Hi there, my name is Adam Kennerley. I'm a social entrepreneur based out of Mid Wales, with plenty of a background around energy, waste, but actually now working on transport, how we have sort of commercial solutions for shifting, achieving sustainable behaviour change.
And then I'm Sandra Philips. I'm tuning in actually from Canada. And I run an organization called MovMi, and we call ourselves a shared mobility architecture firm. So our objectives are to launch and implement shared systems. So whether that's a bike share or a car share, or even a kick scooter share, microtransit, as long as the resources are shared amongst people in a club kind of scenario. That's what we're working on. And we're working on not just in Canada, we're actually working globally. And we have, interestingly enough, we've done some work in the UK outside of London a couple of years ago.
Okay, well, just to kick off then, I'd like to start off by asking you guys, what was the catalyst that got you involved with what you do, or how, what drove you to start your organisation? If I could start with you, Sandra.
It's going to be a little bit of a longer story. I came to transportation in a roundabout way. I should have said I'm actually originally Swiss and then emigrated to Canada about 13 years ago now. And I grew up in a small town in Switzerland, like 10,000 people, but it was all connected. Like my family had one car, my dad worked shifts. So we often didn't have a car available, and we could get anywhere, like literally to the mountains if we wanted to, because it was all connected. And then I landed in Canada, in Vancouver, and I couldn't even get downtown without a taxi or somebody picking me up in a car. So it's like, young, ambitious, I can fix that. And luckily, got a job with an organization called Car2Go, which I think now operates in the UK still under Share Now, which is a free-floating car sharing scheme. And my job was to introduce that in Canadian market. And I think part of the reason they hired me is because I think I was the only interviewee that walked in and knew what car sharing was. So a couple of years after, I was with them for about almost 4 years. It's a large global organization. It's tied to an auto manufacturer, and it wasn't quite the right fit, I think, for me as a person. But also because I had this vision of like, okay, how do we connect public transit, which there is quite a decent system in Vancouver, with these new emerging forms. Sitting in an organization that provided a service just didn't work. So I started MovMi as an essential neutral, and I'm making a joke always about my Swiss heritage again, my neutral Swiss heritage to kind of broker this. And it took a really long time. So I left Car2Go in 2013. I started MovMi in 2014. And literally last year was the time when a first pilot where all these systems are connected happened in Vancouver. So as you can see, it took a long time. But yeah. That's the roundabout story of why I got involved in transportation. And to be honest, part of the reason I'm still in it is because when I worked with Car2Go, I could see, and this goes back to, I think, Adam's comment around behavior change. Like I could see if you make it convenient and easy, people actually do adopt new forms. Where when I started there, everybody's like, this is ridiculous. This is not going to work. And now I think there's 30% of the Vancouver population has a membership in one or the other. We have two big car share schemes. So that's about 200,000+ people now. So Yeah, and that just got me hooked.
Wow. That's very...
Wow, that's a lot of people.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
Yeah. And what about you, Adam?
Well, I'm a relative newcomer to transport. I'm a modest part-time cyclist, so I can't claim to be an aficionado. But I'm an ecologist by training. So what I know, what I love is ecological systems. And then going with that is a frustration of how our ecological systems are eroded. And the conclusion you draw is if our ecological systems are eroded by people, by and large by what we do in particularly our Western worlds, then we need to have a sort of a Western world fix. We have to involve people in the solution, I think was my conclusion. So I left ecology about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, to pursue, I suppose, how to develop businesses that connect people with their planet. So I've wandered across quite a lot of fields. I've got about 9 businesses, startups or turnarounds in the fields of energy efficiency, waste management, farming, food production, but with the same common theme, which is how do you connect people with their solutions. It happens to be I live in mid Wales and I'm attached to an organisation on a part-time basis called Open Newtown, and through them I get to play with their next incubator, which is a shared transport scheme, a car club based around electric vehicles. And the aim is really to try and put car clubs into the towns of Machynlleth, Newtown, Welshpool, basically the towns that sit along what's called the Cambria Line railway that runs through the middle of Wales. From those further afield, that's sort of linking Birmingham through Shrewsbury, through mid Wales and out to the coast, Aberystwyth End, and thinking about how we use cars, shared cars, low carbon cars, and link them to the public transport system in the longer term. But it's very early days. We haven't bought a car yet, so we're on designing the system, building the pathway to how you put that together and embed it into the community of Mid Wales. So my experience here is a very rural one, but that's my journey to transport. I'm interested in what it could do for us. I have no particular interest in combustion engines or wheels or pedals particularly. I'm interested in what transport does for us.
So just picking up on something you said, Sandra, and something you touched on, or what your project does, Adam, do you think that in terms of evolving transport, it doesn't happen naturally from the individual user, that it's actually the place of organisations like yourselves or policymakers to come up with new solutions that people don't realise they'll like until they're there?
So I always say transportation is one of the stickiest habits I think we have, maybe apart from what we eat and drink every day and what we like there. We just it just has to work. We don't think about it. The only time you think about it is if you have a life-altering event, like you move to a new place, or all of a sudden you can't do something anymore, like you're not allowed to drive anymore. That's when you start thinking about it, and that's when you get frustrated. But otherwise, you're just on autopilot. So I think it's a very tricky one to change, and I think there is, in my experience, the ones where it works best if it's kind of a two-prong approach. So you have private providers or government subsidized, it doesn't matter, ultimately somebody who provides a service, and that is more convenient and easier, like less headache. You don't have to think about maintenance, you don't have to think about where do I plug this electric vehicle in because I don't have a charging infrastructure and now I need to build that on top. Like somebody else deals with all those hassles, provides you a good service so you can use it. And then on the other side, you need the policymakers to kind of increase the pressure, specifically on single or personally owned vehicles, whether that is, taking parking minimums away. I know you, obviously in Wales, and I used to live in the south of Dorset for a year, so I know how rural it can get in the UK. So, and Canada is also, there's a lot of rural areas, so this is a little bit different. But ultimately, you want to increase the pressure, whether that's, fuel tax, parking minimums are removed, insurance is increased. Like anything that increases the pressure on the personally owned vehicle, which is quite frankly a dumb investment. And like, if you purely think about investment, it's a dumb investment. Most people spend like about $500,000 over the time of their life on a vehicle that sits 95% of the time somewhere in a parking lot. So I think that's the other. And so
huge
you do need
depreciation
policy
as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You need the two prongs, and then people. But if you just have to push from the regulatory side, but not somebody that provides easier solutions, then people just get frustrated as well. So that's my experience anyway. If you have both, then it really works. And Vancouver has been a place where both sides came together at the right time.
But I think it's an interesting so look at it, isn't it? I agree with you. You need both the pressure and the release valve. If you're going to apply pressure to somebody, you've got to give them somewhere to go. You've got to give them the fix. And I think choreographing that is the hard part. And most of what we've seen, I think, comes about by chance. It's luck, isn't it, if we're in the right place at the right time. And I know we'll all be watching, for the sort of how lucky have we been out of. We can't say the pandemic is lucky, but what opportunities does it create? Yes. I think the other one is spotting the points of change when people are, we used to do this with housing retrofit and energy efficiency. You catch people when they're moving house. You can break the habit. You talk about stickiness, Sandra. Stickiness is there. It's a habit that's been formed. It's been formed by the state providing roads, by big business providing very efficient, very convenient, very reliable cars. Yeah, we've had some very nice habits created. And we need to try and either spot or create those sort of intervention points when you can catch people on a shift. But it's only worth it if you've got somewhere to go, which is why we need, in my view, we need just many more innovators looking at car share schemes, car clubs, access to cycle, that sort of stuff. We need that, otherwise people will be triggered to make the change and then have nowhere to go, get frustrated and go back and hardwire their unsustainable behaviours back inside themselves.
And do you think that it's really important for these solutions to be commercially viable? I know you mentioned there, Sandra, about public subsidy, and all sorts of transport gets public subsidy, including, you could argue, the roads and private yes. car travel. I'm just always interested. I know for sort of bike hire schemes that are often set up and hailed as great successes, I'm always interested to know what the bottom line is with them, because you often see them being used a lot. But I'm always interested to know, are they commercially viable? Is that something that will help them long term become adopted by authorities if there's a clear sort of route towards being cost neutral?
It's a good question. We get it asked all the time. And I think if you're thinking that providing personal transportation services, whether that's bike share or car share or scooter share, if you think that's the next multi-billion-dollar venture and you're going to be rich scheme, then you're in the wrong industry. That's what I always say. Like, it's a low margin industry at best, like really at best. We've seen, successful car shares that have been around for 20 years hanging somewhere, depending on the year, between 4 and 10%. And that's it. So I think it's more, I actually have started to draw the reference more to the hospitality or restaurant industry. I think it's more along those lines, because it's a service industry. And so my take these days is that if we could agree as an industry that shared mobility, the new forms, are just as much a public service, and I think the pandemic has to a certain degree shown that, because people weren't comfortable going into large buses, but they were quite comfortable using an alternative like a bike share scheme or a car share scheme. If we could all just agree that it's also providing a public service, then maybe we have a better chance of talking to subsidy. Because right now, it falls on deaf ears in most cases. Bike share is people are generally a bit more open to discussing subsidies. But as soon as you get to the car clubs, even if they're all electrified, there's somehow the idea that this has to be like self-sustained, and I don't think it always can be.
And I think you have to differentiate some of this language as well. You know, we use the word there, commercial viability. I think it has to be viable. We tend to think commercial is about a transaction between the user and the company. Yeah. And I think, with you there, Sandra, that's it's one of those holy grails, isn't it? But particularly if in a rural area, where I live, they just aren't the users. Yeah. Isn't the footfall. But I think if you can begin to get across the idea of value, and where the value. So you look at what's going on in the agricultural sector at the moment, quite a big discussion around public payments for public benefits, and the understanding that the public purse wants some things, and it's willing to pay for them. And if you tag it as subsidy, it carries this baggage, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's negative word, subsidy.
You're charitable, you need subsidy. You're not commercial, And actually, no, we're taking public money because the public purse, the public want certain things. They want cleaner air quality. They want quieter roads. They want safer roads, They want convenience, And there's quite a long way to go yet for the public sector and the wider world to understand that the way they apply subsidy at the moment, and you're right, they apply subsidy to roads, and they apply subsidy to fuel extraction from the earth, and we don't call it that, So
we call it investment
in terms of language,
right?
Yes.
We call it investment. It's investment in road infrastructure, versus on the public transit side, it's a subsidy. It's a very interesting point you're making.
Do you not find that people like the idea? If you invest in a road, you can see a road, you can touch it, you can drive on it. If you invest in health, what does that mean? Because actually, you're talking about health prevention. I mean, and you're being quite Andrew. You're a cyclist. You understand the health benefits of getting on your bike. But actually, can you tell me? Do you know what the difference is in your blood pressure between where you were 20 years ago and where you are now?
Well, certainly, that's sort of almost sometimes an unmeasurable. We can be, I suppose, the politicians they want measurables. It's that sort of tyranny of numbers. You need a load of numbers for it to make sense to people, and I understand that. I think one of the things, I suppose, being in the social enterprise world as opposed to the more charitable world around cycling, is I think some sort of commercial pressure sometimes does improve the way things are run. I've seen projects in my field, cycle-related projects that are, when they're just heavily subsidised. I don't think that they often amount to much because there's no driving force of, at the end of this, we need to make ends meet. So just from personal experience, I sometimes think that pressure, you're right, not to necessarily make a return or to make a profit for shareholders, but to make things stand on their own 2 feet, it can be a driving force for good.
And big businesses, they use phrases like blended finance when they're talking about things like money loan from the banks, shareholders' investments, and grant money. They get the whole thing and they call it blended finance, and we like that because they're being smart, And we need some of that sort of same language attached to us. Some of it is, there's definitely a commercial element, isn't there? We've got to get to the point where we can see how I financially support this long term. Otherwise, what's the point? But it's sort of certainly where I am and what I do. Some of these things you can't imagine them making a straightforward commercial profit. Within 3 to 5 years, you have to be thinking longer term. So I do think there's an issue about we should try and borrow some of the language from the commercial sector a little bit more, and actually be a bit braver about who we are and what we stand for. I think there's the temptation to be a little bit demure and sort of doff our cap and say, "Yeah, we are trying to do something good. Do you mind giving us some public money, please?" And actually, I think we should be a lot braver and say, "No, we're trying to set up an alternative transport system, one that supports people to do access to services, access to healthcare, mobility to see family, access to jobs." And I don't think we're quite as brave as we ought to be.
So I think
I'm going to suspect that Vancouver says this quite well if you've got 200,000 members.
But I will tell you, one is a cooperative, so social enterprise, and they've been here for about 20 years. And then we have the bike share, which is the typical P3, setup, like in most larger cities. And then the third car share actually is out of the automobile club now. It used to be the car manufacturer one, which was driven as a pure commercial enterprise. The one that we still have up and running is provided by the car club, which is a not-for-profit, but they're very much, it has to be commercially viable. But I think the key is what you just said, and this is, I work with a lot of commercial enterprises in the space that have this idea that this is a quick, like if you scale quickly across the globe, this is going to be your money-making machine for. And I just don't think that's the case. It's this longer term vision. And I think that's the key. If you can get to a point that, this gets profitable, I don't know, or maybe not even profitable, but just break even, within 5 and 10 years, I think we would have better discussions on both sides, on the social enterprise side, but also on the corporate side, or the venture backed.
I think that's what I think that's what investors, whether that be like someone like in this country, the big lottery, or even government, no one will sign up for, I tell you what, I'll subsidise this forever. Yeah. No one will do that. You need to always go to a funder with a business plan that says, look, in this time, I'll at least break even, or I'll bring in some other sources of funding. That's why I think I shouldn't say sort of commercial, but sort of like the viability or the sustainability of it, I think is very important at the outset, because in my experience, no one just writes a blank check.
Yeah.
How are you finding, Sandra, how are you finding it? Because you talked earlier about the passion about sharing. Mm-hmm. And that strikes me as one of the barriers that we face is habit. We've become accustomed to our own little tin box.
Yeah.
And that habit of sharing a car. I know a number of people who are in their own small car clubs, and literally they own a car. I mean, I've done it. Here's my car. You can borrow it. People on insurance, and I share my car. And some of these car clubs are just big versions of that. It strikes me this is one of the habits to trick over, isn't it? Is how do you get someone to think that sharing is a good thing to do, as opposed to a lowering of my status in terms of my car owning capability.
It's so funny how I always find it's funny how we teach our children that sharing is caring, and you should share with your friends, and then we become adults and we're like, I don't want to share anything anymore. It's a tricky one to change. And I will tell you, if I learned one thing from my work, is that sharing and how people care about things is very culturally different. So in France, nobody has a problem sharing. Like I'm using Paris, where they ran Autolib, which was an all-electric car share scheme, and they ran Velib. Nobody has a problem sharing. They all like it, but it's seen as a public utility, and it's like people treat it like terribly. Like I've never seen graffiti on any of the bike share stations in Vancouver. It's a constant problem in Paris. They have people ripping seats with knives in the car share vehicles, which we don't have. We have other issues. In Vancouver, our biggest issues is people bringing dogs in the cars, which they're not supposed to, and not being considerate. So it's very much a cultural thing. I think that's one thing. You have to understand how your culture deals with sharing. Because also messaging around that I think, is where you can influence behavior. And then the other thing I've seen successfully done in a number of really odd places, like for instance Dubai. If you think about Dubai, it's probably the last city you think that a car sharing scheme would take off, and it has. They targeted, or I should say, they targeted a specific group that really struggled getting around. You have. Dubai is a very hierarchical society. So you have the Emiratis at the top. They all have their Maseratis anyway, so that's not the right demographic. And then you have kind of the white expats in the next tier. They all get a company car. And then you have all these other workers that are flown in from everywhere around the world, and they have no access to good transportation. So they targeted into that. But then the other thing they did, and that's not just them, but I've seen it replicated in a lot of successful sharing cities. They tapped into kind of the key influencers of those groups. And again, this is culturally different. In some, like in Vancouver, we're very much outdoorsy. So the local car club has ambassadors in that outdoorsy space from the family with 3 kids that now use the car club, down to the young hipster that goes Instagramming somewhere in the woods. So they tap into those and they become ambassadors for the program. And every time somebody has a really smart program, including ambassadors of that key demographic that they're targeting, it works really well. Because then the cool kid is sharing. So of course I will be sharing too. But it's a tricky one, Britain, and I don't have a one solution answer, basically.
Sometimes the thing about status and sharing. I think famously Margaret Thatcher said, if you're still waiting for a bus when you're 30, you've failed in life, or something. Yeah. That ultimate success means, you having your own car. And I think that's a real problem. And you see the cars getting bigger. I don't know if it's the same in Canada. Cars are getting bigger and bigger. The amount of private space people want on the road is increasing. And I think that status thing, look at the size of my car, I'm important.
Do you think is there a time lag here, a generational shift? I've got 3 lads in their early 20s, and actually
they don't care.
One of them likes his car, but the other 2 have no interest really.
Yeah.
And actually there's a generation growing up who are asking themselves the question, well, why do I need a driving license?
Yeah.
I can access public transport. I can do, and is there something that just says we have to let the generation that likes owning its car to pass through, and we target where we can. I mean, for me, a lot of what it is coalition of the willing. Is we have to go where we can find people who will adopt these systems. Yeah, and you touched on the marketing, isn't it? You touched on we should be investing in the marketing. What's the sensitivity of our marketplace to things like sharing? Where are our key communicators? Yeah, and actually the dark arts of a marketing company, isn't it? This is how they manage to sell so much stuff to us. And I think one of the wide bugbears of the environmental sector is we feel we hold quite high values around the environment, and actually don't recognise the fact that that's limited to about 15% of the population. The rest of them don't care, and then we wonder why they don't believe what we believe. And the answer is, well, we're setting it out all wrong. This issue of where are the families who are running 2 cars that can't afford to run 2 cars? Where, like you see, Dubai, where's the workforce that can't get access to transport? Where are the early adopters or the key communicators you can use to pioneer your marketing? I think we need to be much smarter as a sector. And I suspect if you look at the good schemes, I was watching, looking at Market Co-Cars in Exeter. I just come across, somebody who sat and thought about this and thought about how he's positioning his company, and hasn't relied on the fact that he's got these really good green values inside of him to be the selling point,
So I will back you up on that one. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I was just going to say, in recent times, sorry to bring COVID into the conversation, but I just wonder. I know because we use a van hire a lot to transport bikes around when we need to, and all the things they have to do around cleaning the vans in between different users. Has COVID changed the way we see shared space, whether that be shared transport systems or shared cars? Will be a new barrier, hopefully in the short term, but driving people more into the cars. It was great during lockdown in Cardiff. There was nothing on the roads. Now, I would say the traffic's even worse than before because no one's on buses. No one's wants to share anything.
It is, and I don't think it's just Cardiff. We've seen it across. I chair the global COVID shared mobility task force, and we've literally everybody on that task force has reported the same pattern. There's more car sales, individual car sales. Now, the one interesting thing though is and this goes back to my point earlier, you have to have kind of the reliable alternatives for people to switch over. In cities like, for instance, Berlin, they've actually done a study around it. So it's not just me telling you anecdotally. It's a study that backs this up. So Berlin has a plethora of all these services. And Berlin is very spread out, right? So you have, I can't even remember how many car club schemes, and then you have kick scooter schemes, a bike share scheme, and you have a public transit, and it's all interconnected. So they have a mass application. So all of those services are connected. And what they could see is like, yes, people didn't feel comfortable being in a bus anymore, and still don't quite feel comfortable. So they shifted over to those individual vehicles like bike share and kick scooters. And then if they have to choose between, I can't get a kick scooter because I need to transport things, but I don't feel comfortable on a bus, they pick the car club. And so I think my point is, if we had a system with lots of options, then we could counteract what's happening right now. But because we're always just having one or the other, then people go back because health is the number one. It's still the number one right now decision-making factor for transportation choices, which we have done lots of these studies and never has health factored in like as number one. It was maybe number 10. Like cost, was number one. Cost, reliability, convenience, but not health. And you can't build the supply that quickly. So it's a little bit like we're in a hard place right now, but I think we're also in a place where we have a chance to set it up differently, because something else will happen. And we better be prepared next time rather than.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm interested in the question. I'm interested in the question to you, Andrew, because I think we've talked here about cars quite a lot, or car shares, etc. One of the things I've seen in all sorts of places is the modal shift to electric bikes. I'm just going to bring this around to bikes. Yeah. I'm going to make one comment. I'm going to ask a question. My comment is, if we were leaving this to the commercial sector, we'd basically be replacing petrol cars with electric cars. Yeah. We'd just be saying green the fleet. Yeah. Without any understanding really of the environmental impact of an entirely electric fleet, because whilst it's obviously zero emissions at the point of driving, there's just massive. Anyway, putting that aside, one of the things I've noticed is the people who've shifted to electric bikes, and they're not the cyclists. You're sitting there, Andrew, in your cycling jersey, and I'm going to guess you don't ride an electric bike.
I don't know, but I think they're a great thing, as you say, which I think is quite correct. There's more people go to electric bikes from non-cyclists than cyclists going to electric bikes.
And I wonder whether this is one of those little bridging technologies that is part of our. If you were spotting this, you'd go right, electric bikes, because it gets people out of the car. They see it as an alternative to the car, not an alternative to cycling.
And what's amazing, when I'm out riding of a weekend, you can be in the middle of nowhere and you might see I'd say elderly couple, but they're sort of people that you wouldn't see in the top of the mountains out together having a great time. And they're in maybe their 60s, 70s. You would never have seen those people on bikes in that setting. And also, when we go and do sort of doctor bike sessions at workplaces, we see more people commuting on electric bikes that wouldn't have done before because there's a big mountain in between their home and the workplace. We also know from some of our older volunteers in our workshop who have slowly been reducing the amount they cycle because of, not ill health as such, but they just can't go as far as they used to go. Now they've got an electric bike. Wow, they're back out doing their 100 miles every weekend. So, yeah, it's a brilliant enabler. And I think although the price is, the price for a new electric bike is still quite high, there's more and more things coming on the market now of conversion kits to help people just make their own bike or a bike sitting in the shed into an electric bike. So I think it's getting better and better, and it's helping the bike industry. A lot of bike shops, it's saving them from closure. The fact that suddenly these electric bikes now they can sell.
And I wonder. It strikes me it's one of those things that does nudge behaviour change. There are people out there experiencing fresh air cycling that would never have experienced it before.
Yes, it's just the price tag at the moment. To go out and get a decent electric bike, you're talking $1,500, $2,000. So that's quite a lot. for someone to sort of fork out in one go. I know some of the bike share schemes are going to introduce electric bikes. Unfortunately, like you said, Sandra, I know in Cardiff the bike share scheme also suffers from a lot of vandalism, which I don't know is a one-off or whether that's going down in level. But I know initially there was a lot of vandalism. But hopefully, I know a lot of bike hire places are now introducing more electric bikes, so people can be more confident when they're on holiday to go, oh, let's not get a car. Look, we can take these bikes. I'm not limited by my fitness on how far I can go. I can go on these trails. So it's opening up the bike world to far more people, and I'm hoping that price will come down as more and more people use it, and there's an incentive to bring that price down to include more people.
And I particularly wonder how it's in Vancouver, maybe because it's a bigger example. If you get these shifts, these nudges where people change, because half of this is about just getting momentum and getting people to take the first step. Wrong phrase, but because once they've made one step, they go, well, that wasn't so bad. Leaving my car behind wasn't so bad. How do you then get them? And I wonder how much we need public state coordination around some of these things, because actually choreographing the transport hubs between cars, buses, bikes, is actually quite a big deal, isn't it? And I'm not entirely sure we plan it sufficiently well here in the UK. What's Vancouver like?
So we have, and it's, I wish I could say we're planning this extremely well, but we're not. I think we have in the city itself. So obviously Vancouver, right? There's the city, the core city that everybody thinks about, which is about 700,000 people. And then there's Metro Vancouver, which is about 2.2 million people, and it spreads out. So in the city of Vancouver, we have a very active planning department and engineer department that thinks about, okay, can we co-locate these pieces? Can we have the bike share station next to public transit station? Can we also have a couple of car club cars there? So I would say in the city of Vancouver, not everywhere, but it's at least somewhat thought through and try and get close to those hubs. If you go further out, you have less planning resources in the cities as well. And they have to do a million things. So focusing on mobility hubs is not, it's just one piece. And so it's really hard. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because there has been an interesting movement in Metro Vancouver. We got, for your knowledge, Vancouver did not let Uber or Lyft enter the market until early last year, and it came with a lot of strings attached that they were allowed to operate. I'm not wanting to go into what Uber and Lyft is doing, but one of the things the cities have done when they realized it is coming, the provincial legislator will allow them at some point, is realize we have cities that have large planning departments and we have cities that have little. But this flow of these Uber cars will go across. So we need to start thinking intermunicipal, and we need to start building almost like transportation planning groups. And a group that has a lot of resources will essentially spearhead that and help the other municipalities. And I think that's a brilliant approach. And I wish this would have happened way earlier, but I also wish this would happen in other jurisdictions, because Toronto is a prime example. Now, again, I'm using a large city, but Toronto is operating as if it was 20 little individual cities in the neighborhoods, and it's absolutely not coordinated. It's a complete mess. I actually sometimes think in a rural context, you're much better position. We work with one rural area in the Kootenays, which is very rural and very rugged, and they're actually better at coordinating their resources. Maybe because they have to, because if they don't, there's no.
I think it's definitely something that says we have to.
Exactly.
There's no sort of state intervening over the top of us.
Yeah.
Then we get the additional one, which is we're on the border with England. We're on the border with England. So you then get the added complication of how do you communicate between rural Wales and slightly more metropolitan West Midlands.
Yeah.
But hey, yes, more coordination would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Over something like planning.
I was
over
going to
transport.
ask, one of the things that's popped up, because you brought up the price of the e-bikes, and I know this is a big point of contention. Is there any, like, we just got the Cash for Clunker system, and they include now, so if you bring your old car and turn it in, essentially, I'm no longer using that car, you can tap into, I think it's 2,000 Canadian dollars now, towards an e-bike. So you have different choices. You have different choices. Don't quote me on the price. I might get the price wrong, but it's fairly large. Like, it would subsidize about half of the bike.
We've had a scrappage scheme here in the UK on and off for years, haven't we, Andrew? But it's been scrap your old car for a new car.
Yeah.
Should we do one for scrap your old car for an e-bike?
Right.
Well, I think there has been a thing in workplaces of cycle to work scheme where the government's given tax incentives, so you basically get a big tax discount on a purchase of a bike that you're going to commute with, and it's up to a third off the cost of the bike. And I imagine that e-bikes, I'm sure the bike industry especially will be pushing for this, that they can be included. So it'll basically take a third off the price of them, which, and again, with a push that those bikes should be used for commuting. Okay. So I hope.
And I like the idea that what you do, you're trading in generally an older car, for not only something that's electric but is pedalled as well. And you're back in that modal shift, territory. Because the old scrappage scheme, swap your old car for a new car, does nothing to change your modal.
No, exactly.
Way of doing things.
And they have built the menu. So you can either use it, I can't remember, maybe it's $500 towards a car club. You can use it towards an e-bike. And I think there's two other ones that you can, and I think you can also get just a check, a much smaller check in cash if you're just deciding you're not getting any other car, but you also don't want any of the other things because, I don't know, you move somewhere. But it's a menu now. So it's not just trade your car for a new car anymore.
I think one of the big drivers behind electric bikes, certainly in the city, has been the Deliveroo and Uber Eats. Almost all those people who are having to cycle around, they've all got these electric bikes, mainly kits that have been, but that's a group of people professionally now that are using them a lot as they're having to sort of cycle all day in all weathers.
I was going to ask a question about Wales here, because it strikes me that, Sandra, we should say to you, if you send us that over, we'd quite interested to see how that menu works. And I was going to link it to a question about Wales, because I quite like, and we are obviously in a Renew Wales conversation, I quite like Wales as a place to innovate. You can get close enough to the government, to be able to put these sort of suggestions in with some chance that they'll be heard, which is just not the case in the wider UK. I just wonder whether, Andrew, whether you come across any of the politicians and what. Well, I only ask that because you're in Cardiff, and in Mid Wales we don't see politicians very often.
The active travel bill, I definitely think has helped. That's a bit of legislation Sandra had in Wales that has really pushed all local authorities, especially to show what they're doing to get people to travel more actively, whether that's walking or I think make a big push on walking and cycling, safer routes to school. More cycle routes, but also sort of networking these routes and not just putting in a little bit of cycle lane, but how does that network in with getting to and from schools or shopping? So I think that's really good. I think you're right. You feel like you can more easily have a conversation sometimes with policymakers because we're a smaller country. I think we've probably, on the flip side, and I know this is an issue around all sort of sustainable transport, is that rural-urban debate, whereas sometimes it seems easier to initiate these things in urban contexts where quite clearly the car is an impractical and expensive thing to run, but it's a sort of different debate completely, or different solutions are required, like you're doing, Adam, in more rural areas. And I think for Wales, it's quite a rural country. We've got one or two large cities, and the rest of the population is in a rural area. So that's maybe something we share with Canada, in a sense. We've got lots of rural space.
Big rural hinterland.
Yeah, I'm laughing because yes, as a Swiss, you're like, we talked about rural Switzerland. It's like rural Switzerland is not rural, but rural Canada is like, yeah, vast stretches of nothingness in between.
We've just got a couple of minutes to go, and I just would like to ask both of you a reason to be optimistic going forward in the next in the next few years. Give me a reason for optimism around transport.
Well, maybe that silence isn't very good. Are we feeling optimistic? I've got a genuine. I am an optimist. A genuine sense that we are beginning to understand climate change, and we are beginning to understand that things have to shift. And I think that transport, actually accelerated by the experience of the pandemic, I think transport is one of those where you could effect change in the next 5 years. But I think if in the pub, we've got to pedal away at it quite hard.
Like that.
You can't just sit back and wait for it to happen. So I'm quite optimistic that if we apply the energy, we'll get something quite positive out of it.
I will tell you, I was just quiet because I was letting you go first. But I am quite optimistic, and I'm going to just talk in the North American context, not just Canada. So, on the MovMi side, the first few years, there were a few projects here and there. It didn't feel like there was momentum in a lot of cities. In Europe is always a bit ahead of us when it comes to changing personal transportation, I think, because historically or generally, there's a lot more dense urban areas, right? So you have to sort it out. Where in Canada and in North America, we have lots of space. We have built everything around the car, basically. So, but here, all of a sudden, the last 2-3 years, and has accelerated just the speed of new technology coming out, a new type of modes, electrifying things. But also, since the pandemic, there's more of an appetite of collaborating, specifically between public transport and these new forms, which before they saw each other a little bit as competitors. And now they feel like they're part of the solution of not getting rid, but, not having everybody have to own a car or multiple cars to get around. So I think those are two reasons. And then the third reason I will tell you is actually, and I'm going to go towards politics, but it's the new government change in the US. Because the federal group has put policies around transportation in place that my American colleagues have been waiting for decades and nothing has happened. So there is investment into, cycling infrastructure, electrification of transportation, public transport, which historically has not gotten much at all in the US. So I'm really quite optimistic that we have a setup now and momentum from the private and the public sector to really get us out of, I think, the Carmageddon mess we created 100 years ago or maybe 80 years ago.